in the WEF survey, it said that the Philippines is the highest Asian country in terms of gender equality. But people like Dr. Junas Melgar would argue that the picture isn't that rosy. So there seems to be a contradiction.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Yeah. Um, I'm not always comfortable with these surveys, no, that look at indicators. Of course, there's no other way to really judge if you're going to do like a worldwide ranking or survey than to look at the indicators. But to me, it's sometimes very misleading and deceiving because it is possible that, for example, when they rank, do you have sufficient laws? And we do have pretty strong laws, especially with the passage of first the Magna Carta and the Magna Carta for women, and then after that, the reproductive health law. So, we probably might get a 10 star when it comes to passage of laws. And, humility, I'm pretty active in, going into the review of all of discriminatory laws, etc. And then, they'll talk about having policies in place, and believe me, you'll see all the policies in memo circulars and everything. But if you look deeper, like for example, and you and I know that during the time of GMA, she was very anti-reproductive health, and this was reflected in the practices and the budget of the Department of Health. So if that survey did not indicate certain indicators like what is the budget that you provide for ensuring that women have access to contraceptives or reproductive health, then the indicators you might be using will show that we get we're stellar. Another example I'll give you is, for example, in the area of political maturity in terms of accepting women leaders. Well, we do have women, very empowered women in both the private sector and the public sector. In the private sector, no doubt, no hands down, in Asia, we have quite a few women here. But if you look at it, and this does not in any way diminish their personal achievements, okay? I'm just stating a fact. A lot of them are daughters of taipans. In the same way, I will say that if people look at me as a successful, empowered woman politician, I am a daughter of a former politician, a male politician. Now, why do I include that in the background? That's because this is what gave us women the opportunity to excel. I don't disregard it. I cannot disregard it. And I am eternally grateful for the opportunities my parents gave me. But that is why when you look at women empowerment, you have to really dig really deep and say, are you sure? We have had two women presidents, both of whom were kind of anti-RH. Now, I mean, it wasn't a long debate in the time of President Cory, but that was her stand. So I'm saying, these indicators can be deceiving. Yes, it does mean that we have achieved a lot of things in some ways, but it doesn't paint the complete picture.
What would be the picture to you? Like, what do you think are the gains that the Philippines has made, but also the challenges for
Okay,
now?
yes. On the gains, and this is where I am always proud, there is no brick wall that prevents women from excelling. In other words, it's not as if, there's this brick wall you have to pound down to allow women to excel. No, and that is why, given the opportunities, women will excel. That's the good news. So given the opportunity for a Cory Aquino, for personal events to lead her, give her that opportunity. Same with GMA, as we all know, she was the vice president when the then president, everything collapsed and she took over. They can step up, and we have women who've been number one and in the top 5, top 10 of senatorial campaigns. So they will excel because if you look back, women do have education. Thankfully, we are past those times where women per se as a sex are asked to step back and not go to school. That still happens, but not in a systematic, customary way. We still see it happening in other countries. You know what I'm saying? So, so the women are equipped just as equally as men. And if you actually look at the statistics of women in higher education, women going to med school and law school, they say that not only is it equal, but in some colleges, women surpass. So the women are equipped, they have the potential, and now we do not have that brick wall, but we have that glass ceiling. So what does that mean? Meron pa rin, no? There's this layer of there's this obstacle that's transparent that you could actually penetrate with a punch. Not, you don't need to bring out all your equipment, but it's still there. And why is that? Because in as much as we have been trying to prepare women in terms of equality, in many instances, not I don't think this was done with that in mind. You know, we look back 30 years ago, I don't think that was the driving force, but it just so happened that we have a lot of families that are matriarchal. So they'll give the women the opportunities to shine, to thrive. So fast forward 1 or 2 generations, you have all these women who are equipped. But what is that glass ceiling? That glass ceiling was put in place also by traditions and customs. In other words, worldwide customs, which basically tell us all that women are the primary caregivers in the home, is the #1 deterrent for women stepping up and taking responsible positions both in government and in the private sector. And I say this is worldwide, no? More regional and Filipino is really that, oh, you really should stay at home. And I still have friends like that their husbands never let them work or said to them, you can have a sideline. I mean, what does that mean? You know, women should have a sideline and a career, whatever it is they want, not what their husband wants. So we still have those Filipino or regional glass ceilings in place that prevent us. And one more example I want to give you is when you look at political systems, and I speak of gender equality and women empowerment wherever I go to the province and I will remind political parties or the mayor or the governor that, hey, don't forget, you know, in the coming elections, be sure that you have a strong women's voice, that you include women in your party. And they're usually proud to tell me, oh yeah, we have 1 woman. So you have a council of 10 or of 12, and they are proud that there is 1 woman. So there's something wrong with that way of thinking, and I know they don't mean it. You know, they're not trying to be sinister or you know, it is just that to them is enough, because historically, traditionally, men lead. So that's where we are. That's what we're trying to penetrate. Or, you know, when you look at the cabinet, the makeup of the division heads, even in the local government, of course they're women. They're great. I mean, it's almost unheard of not to have a woman there. But sometimes there's like 2 or 3. Why isn't there equal amount? Why isn't there? Not that I'm asking them to really do a count, but why don't you have 40%, 45, 50, or in sometimes 60%? Why? Because of this glass ceiling, because of traditions and practices that prevent women from really, you know, seizing the opportunities.
When you talk about women's rights in the Philippines, one of the recent milestones was, of course, the passage of the RH law. And when the Supreme Court finally said it was constitutional in April, you said that ultimately the message is that this is for poor Filipino women. Like, why is that? Like, it seems to be a class issue, reproductive health here in the Philippines. Why?
Yes. Well, I'm always happy to explain why I say that. Those who were opposed to RH one of their banner statements was that, well, if women want access to reproductive health, whether it's by way of contraceptives or advice, they should go out and buy it. They can go to the drugstore and buy any kind of contraceptive legally available. They can go to the doctor and ask for advice. But that is the problem. We still are a country that lives in poverty. Millions of our women are poor. Many of them have to make the choice as to who of their kids will eat breakfast today and who will have lunch, and if any of them will have dinner, and if they do, she won't. So for a woman to have to make that choice, who will eat today, and in some cases, who goes to school, definitely contraceptives is the last thing that she's going to pay for. She's just going to close her eyes and just hope to God that she doesn't get pregnant. That is the real story. And that is why I strongly felt at that time that government must step up. And in the same way government has feeding programs for women who just cannot, for families who just cannot feed their kids, we should have reproductive health programs for families to help them have a normal marital life. Because, some people would even say, well, that's up to the family to control. I mean, seriously, you're married. Sex is a normal part of any relationship. And as a lot of women say, that's, when you're poor, that's the only thing you can give your husband. Have sex, be happy. So they can't do this responsibly if they already have 5 kids and they're on their 10th. And that's why I always felt government should lend a helping hand instead of trying to help them later on when they have the 5th kid they can't afford and didn't want to have. Then you might as well help them plan their family and be a great family with 2 kids, 3 kids, 4, whatever the number is. The law never dictated that to them.
What are your concerns going into the implementation phase of the law? Now there's a 3.3 billion peso budget for 2015 for RH, because people say, in the Philippines, as you said, we have very good laws, but it's in the implementation that there seems to be a challenge.
Yeah. Well, for a country with 100 million Filipinos, and we just celebrated the birth of the 100 million Filipino child, and then 7,000 islands, you can imagine the logistical nightmare in ensuring that any kind of program would have to undergo to really roll it out. And since we follow a devolved form of government, the powers are devolved to the local government, you then have to rely on the sincerity, the capability, and dedication of the local government officials to get these programs done. So in a nutshell, you can already imagine how things could not go perfectly well given best intentions. So what I do know is that, first of all, I always say after the law, I've done my part, and the most I can do is look into it in my oversight capacity. I can't step in and take charge because that is not my job anymore. So in our oversight capacity, I keep in touch with what's going on and find out how they're rolling it out. And basically, the Department of Health itself is still taking a hands-on approach and working directly with the local governments, which I think is the best thing to do for now. Because first of all, it's a big budget program. And so it is good that DOH, keeps a handle on it, and I do highly recommend that they do their self-audit very carefully, just to be sure that if they ship variety of products out to provinces, they're ensured that it gets to the recipient. So it's basic. I mean, it's the same problem you will face with any other big budgeted program. But at the end of the day, it is a problem that we put upon ourselves. We didn't just wake up with this. It takes a generation. I mean, 30 years ago, we didn't have this kind of population issue, so we have to deal with it.
Let's go to the Millennium Development Goals, which are set to, the deadline is set next year. Like in the recent report of NEDA, it said that one of the goals that the Philippines will likely not achieve is the one on reducing maternal mortality. Why do you think this has been such a difficulty for the Philippines?
Yeah, I'm really sad about that, and that was something we were harping about in the reproductive health law debates. At that time, we were not on target, and in fact, at the height of the debates, our maternal mortality rate even went up instead of down. I am disappointed, and I do attribute that to a decade, really, like a solid decade of neglect on the status of women when it comes to their maternal mortality health. And that sadly was highly influenced by the personal religious beliefs of officials then, which is sad, which is why I will always harp on the importance of separation of church and state. It is not enough that you do post-pregnancy planning. What I mean by that is after the woman is born and they say, no problem, will we have more hospitals, more lying-in clinics? Yes, but it's her 10th child. You know what I mean? Like, we didn't help her prior to the pregnancy period to help her plan her family. And a lot of them have that problem. I mean, I'm not going to go into that, but that is the reality. So it is really sad, and we all know that. Well, no, let me. Many people do not know that child mortality rate is directly linked to maternal mortality rate. And although it appears that we are okay with our child mortality rate, if you further dissect that, they dissect that child is usually, the young children is 0 to 5. And you can further dissect that to birth to 1 month and then a month to, I think, 12 months. And our birth to 1 month ratio is bad as well. That's because these women who are at risk of dying or of complications during their pregnancies also give birth to high risk infants.
But Taneda said that the RH, at least they hope, will help make a dent on this. Did you see that direct impact?
Well, I believe without a doubt that it will make a serious dent. Many people do not understand that the reproductive health law is quite comprehensive. The debates, well, at least those that were brought to the public's attention, usually focus on the fact that the law provided for contraceptives to be made available to couples, to families, in all public facilities. And so people thought that RH law is just about contraceptives, when in fact we address the need to attend to women's health issues, reproductive health issues. And these are all kinds of women-specific cancers, women-related ailments that are related to the reproductive health. So a lot of these will be covered by this law. And I do feel strongly, if it is implemented, that you will see a change in even half a generation.
Another MDG where we're faring poorly, according to NEDA, is the one on political participation of women in terms of the number of women we have in elective seats, and you touched on that earlier. What do you think is the challenge there? Like, despite what people say to be a high gender equality in the Philippines, why can't we seem to get enough women in government?
I just don't think it's being discussed as much as it should be. Like I said, no, there's this presumption that that's not an issue, that is not a concern, precisely because, wow, in Asia you're one of the few who have had a woman president, and we actually have a woman chief justice. And hindi naman the women in the Senate or in Congress in general are visible enough to know that we're there. But like I told you, if you dissect it, then you'll realize that, yeah, there's not enough. I mean, ratio-wise. And really, you know what this needs is the same kind of bottom-up education, awareness campaigns. That's what has to be done. This has to do also, I believe, with a weak political party system. Because in strong political parties in other countries, and I don't ever know if we're ever going to have a strong political party, that's another discussion. But they look into the budget. How much budget does the political party allocate to strengthen the women? How much budget is being allocated even on media to educate the voters on the need for women representatives, on the need for communities to start preparing their young leaders, whether they're students, young professionals, for this kind of public service. They look into that. But what are we going to look into? We don't have that set up. So I think in the same way that there have been NGOs, there are NGOs that have done wonders for women's rights when it comes to reproductive health rights or women's health issues. It's high time that we start campaigning in that direction also. Participation in the public governance.
In your experience, what was it like being a female legislator pushing for women's rights? Did you encounter any of these obstacles or discrimination when you started out or even until now?
Well, again, because men are used to women having a few voices of women there, I did not encounter anything similar to the discrimination, the blatant discrimination that colleagues of mine in the international scene have. So because I work closely with women parliamentarians from all over the world, and so I do not have the kind of experiences they had where in a debate, they literally would be shut down because they were a woman and all that. I don't have those experiences. What I do have a richness of experiences in is the fact that a lot of my issues they find funny. Like they laugh at it. It's either as we all know, laughter is either a sign of discomfort or a sign that something is not serious. Either way, I don't appreciate my issues being laughed at. So from breastfeeding
Right.
to the fact that I am always on the women's issues. I mean, in the background, not so much now. I've been around for 10 years, so more of in the past. But where you feel like you can feel them saying, ayan na naman, tungkol na naman sa women empowerment. That kind of theme. And I don't mind as long as it helps raise awareness, and I don't mind being labeled as the person who fights for women's rights, as long as they listen and as long as I can help them step up, So what I do experience also are traditions and habits that make it difficult for a woman to excel. And let me give you an example. This was mentioned by a international colleague of mine, but then I realized that it was also happening with us. No, it is not intentional, it is just the way it is. So if you are a woman politician and you have children and you are the primary caregiver, as most mothers are, after work, what do? You go home. You go home to take care of your kids. So that has always been a concern of mine, because many times meetings happen over drinks after work. And it sounds very shallow, but when it was discussed more than once in international gatherings of women parliamentarians, I realized this is serious. This is a common concern. As many men will attest, and business women will attest as well, they miss out on opportunities sometimes because they were not at the bar where the boys club meet, or they were not at the golf game where the deal was sealed. So that is similar in that sense. And it is not meant to, in my case, I'm pretty sure it was not meant to prevent me from being there. It's just the habits. So I'm conscious of that because I saw it early on, and I was like, this is a problem for me. And you try to deal with it in a way at first without highlighting the fact that I have to go home, I have kids. But eventually I would talk about it more openly because it is a fact. And I decided that I will discuss it not just with my colleagues who asked for a meeting, but in public when I'm interviewed, because this is an issue faced by women all over the world, confronted with these opportunities to serve their country or to make politics their career, and not be a delinquent mother.
Speaking of, you said you experience it, they would usually laugh. I remember in the RH debate, one of the topics that suddenly became funny, quote unquote, was on safe and satisfying sex.
Oh yes, exactly.
And then, but you said that's actually in international law or in international
The
agreements.
phrase
That's
was
the term,
yes, yeah, and it was unbelievable that normally when these debates were occurring on the floor, usually the only ones actively participating is the sponsor, which is me, and the person interpellating. And on that topic, I think there were like 6 or 8 people who took it up, and I welcome that because it gave me a chance to educate my male colleagues, and henceforth I continued to use it because it did draw attention to people when I would be in conferences, not necessarily RH related, but sometimes I would be introduced as the sponsor of the bill, so I would take that opportunity to educate people because that's what gets their attention. So I hate it that it in they were laughing about it, but this was more like a bit of laughter of discomfort, right? Because if you recall, they were like, why do you have to include such a phrase in a law? And again, if you recall, the person who explained that quite well was my brother, Senator Alan, who asked the body to distinguish, are we uncomfortable because of the simple fact that we do not want that phrase, safe and satisfying sex, in the law? Or are we uncomfortable with the words, and therefore let's dig deeper and look for more appropriate words? So what is the discomfort? The choice of words, or the fact itself that we have to discuss this? And that, brought about more debate. So
Speaking of laws, what do you think is next now for the Philippines? I understand you're working on amending the family code, like to take out some discriminatory provisions.
yes. Yeah, so we're working on that. There's quite a lot. The difficulty there now is that the law historically, and this is also present in many laws all over the world, gives the presumption, gives the authority to the men or the father to make final decisions. So we're now saying it should be both. And that's causing a bit of a problem, because for certain acts to have validity, let's say when you enter into a contract with a third party, before the assumption, well, now as it stands, the assumption in many cases are the father can make the decision for the woman under the law. But when we were looking at it, I said, well, in truth, nowadays, I think most couples make the decision as a team. Gone were the days where, the wife is just quiet and the husband. Now, many times the woman can talk on behalf of her. Like when it comes to school matters, I would think most of the decisions are made by the women when it comes to school. So in practice, the decisions are actually made by the women, and yet the law says in case of disagreement, it's the husband's decision that prevails. So I'm working on that and seeing how we can either change that. Ideally, you change that into both. But in some cases, think of a very simple thing. Go on a field trip. Mother says yes, and that's accepted. But but the law actually says it's the father in case of doubt. Well, what if the father says, wait, I'm not allowing my kid to go on that field. What is the school gonna do? Okay, what does the law say? It says the father, sorry, okay. So we're studying that now. And then more serious ones are laws that have a different definition on what marital infidelity is. Now, it's easier to prove marital infidelity when the woman commits it. It's harder to prove it for a man, and so on and so forth.
After our age, what do you think are the chances for things like abortion or divorce in the Philippines? Because internationally, like the UN Human Rights Committee actually suggested that we ease up on our abortion laws, at least to save the life of a woman. But of course, here there's still that great controversy because of the church's opposition. What are the odds for these topics to be discussed, at least discussed?
Actually, if you ask any doctor on the practice of, like for example, a ectopic pregnancy, that is already a given practice that they save the life of the mother, because that baby will not grow into a full baby because it's ectopic. The baby is not supposed to grow there. So that is already a given. And in as much as I'd like to codify that, to make that clear under the law, I don't feel that we are that mature to discuss it soon after the RH. In any case, as I said, ask any doctor, and that is the practice that they will say. That's even in the constitutional debates. So that is the practice. I'm not going to go into it now, because after what I saw are the violent reactions to things like that, we might end up in a situation where I diminish the existing rights of women just because at any given point in time, there may be other legislators who have very stringent views and may even contradict current practice. So my point is, currently, the life of the mother is being protected. That is the practice. I'm comfortable with that for now. There are other circumstances that sadly we are not even dealing with. I just feel the timing isn't so right yet, I mean, it was a very controversial topic for many to deal with.
What about divorce?
Divorce is part of the review that we're currently doing on the discriminatory laws towards women, because we do have Article 36, which is psychological incapacity as a ground for annulment. So along with that, and there are some bills that have been filed, we're studying that. And I actually do hope to come up with a committee report soon.
Lastly, what do you think the Philippine experience on women's rights would offer? Because if you look at the issues around the world, like for countries like Pakistan, their issue would be more of educating girls, like in the
Yes,
case of
yes.
Malala. In the Philippines, what do you think our experience would say about where women are at today?
Where we are at today, we're in a pretty decent place. And I can say that now because of reproductive health law. Without the reproductive health law, I would be very uncomfortable saying we're in a decent place, because despite the Magna Carta of women, and like I said, we have education, we're not similar to Bangladesh or Pakistan or even India. We have had women president. I would still be so uncomfortable, because that one very important component, which is biologically, that's what a woman does. She gives birth. To deny her of all the protection that she can have because it is related to her sexual function, and that is a taboo subject when it comes to some churches, to me was really unacceptable. So now that we have reproductive health law in place, I can say that we're in a decent place. But can it be better? Of course. It's like saying, are you happy that your kids are eating 3 meals a day? Of course not. You aspire for more. You aspire for comfort. You aspire for them to hold the stars in their hands. So will all of these mothers now be able to plan their families? Not necessarily, because it will take time for the reproductive health law, number one, to be rolled out, and number two, for it to really have an effect on their family. And what are the role models these young girls are seeing? A lot of these women are victims of violence, victims of trafficking. A lot of their parents, mothers, did not have a choice to explore their options and be a working mother, or they probably got married early and didn't even get to finish school. So even the role models of this next generation of young girls is limited. So I have cautious optimism about our future. I am optimistic because we're laying the groundworks, but the work doesn't stop. We have to keep moving forward and keep being vigilant about ensuring that the laws we made are being implemented, that these 100 million Filipinos, and that's my burden, like there are just so many. How can you be sure that these laws are touching the lives of every child? I mean, with roughly a 50-50 ratio, we're talking 50% men and 50% women. How do we ensure that? It's not an easy job.